Good afternoon and welcome back to Drupal GovCon. A couple of announcements before we get started. Thank you, first of all, for NIH for hosting, for the NIH Library, for Kathy Bass and all the events management team that are behind the scenes, keeping things running smoothly. The many volunteers, The many volunteers that work in registration table and throughout, they were all wearing red shirts yesterday. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes throughout the course of the entire year. We're going to meet this sometime this week to start talking about 2019. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. We have people focus on working with our sponsors and our exhibitors. We have people that work on the food that you're going to enjoy in a little bit, the AV, lots of different areas, the training classes. So thank you to all of them. But also, if you'd like to help, we could always use more help. So please see me, see Kirsten, see someone up at the registration table. We'll gladly hook you up. Most of all, thank our sponsors. You've seen the crawl going all day. Especially want to thank our core sponsors, Civic Actions, Debug Academy, and Mobomo. The space here at NIH is provided at no cost, so the breakout rooms in this room, no cost. The NIH Library covers the cost of the live streaming that's happening, as well as the recording of the keynote speakers. Everything else is provided by all those exhibitors and sponsors that provide the food and provide all the other stuff that we need, so we definitely want to make sure we thank them. Okay. Reminder, in this day and age, we do have a code of conduct. We want everybody to treat everybody equally and fair. So please check out our website on the code of conduct. But basically, be nice to everybody. Make sure you stop at the nonprofit tables. We have a couple nonprofit tables on the lower level. All of the exhibitors are up on the upper level. But on the lower level, we have University of Maryland and Drupal Diversity and Inclusion. So please check them out and find out what they're doing and see how you can get involved with them. We encourage you to tweet. We have Drupal GovCon and Drupal #4Gov. If you want to tweet about any of the sessions or what's going on. We do have a Facebook page as well, Drupal GovCon, if you'd like to see what's happening there too. It's day 2, so hopefully everybody's found the bathrooms, but they're on either side, and there's some upstairs as well. Make sure you take some time out to visit the different exhibitors. We've got the best vendors from across the industry here, so make sure you check them out, see what they're doing. A lot of them are probably hiring as well, so if you're looking for that too. Reminder that unlike DrupalCon, we have a more active fire marshal here, so we can't have people standing, sitting, streaming out the door in the different rooms, so we will be watching for that. Because of that, we have more of a dynamic seating configuration, so we change the room locations as needed when we see that there's a lot of people that have liked a session and plan to attend it later today. So we'll move things around either into this room or into a larger room. So make sure you pay attention to the online schedule to see what room a different session is going to be in. We try to keep all the sessions within the same day. This morning there was a session that was canceled because the speaker wasn't able to come. So beyond those kind of things that we can't avoid, we try to keep everything in the same time slot, just move the room around. So please pay attention to that. If you have any questions, there's always a help desk up at registration table. Lunch is being served outside today. Today we have 2 lines, one on the right side of the tent, one on the left side of the tent. It's box lunches from Boogie Monger. The drinks will be outside as well, so we should be able to get through the line much faster than we did yesterday. First in line will be the people that have the word Thursday on their badge. That meant that you received the email and you confirmed your registration a couple weeks ago. If you don't have that on there, there should be plenty, but you'll be next in line. Tomorrow is barbecue from JavaWorks, so hamburgers, hot dogs, that sort of stuff. If you have special lunches, specifically if you signed up for kosher, vegan, or gluten-free, go to the registration table. Let's see, everything else should be outside. Make sure you clean up after yourself. There's lots of trash cans around. And then a reminder that we use MailChimp to send out messages about new training, about the registration confirmation and so forth. We automatically subscribe you to that. Some people unsubscribe, so they never got the confirmation request. So for next year, don't unsubscribe, and you'll be able to get lunch. So last, but definitely not least, I want to bring up Ashraf Abed from Debug Academy to introduce our keynote speaker.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the organizers of the event. It's a great event, and if you've been to events like DrupalCon, consider the ticket costs at those events, the fact that they're running this event for free with the support of NIH and all the sponsors is really quite amazing. So again, shout out to them. Round of applause for Kirsten and crew. My name is Ashraf. I founded Debug Academy around 4 years ago, and I'm proud to say that we've had a noticeable impact on the Drupal community in terms of increasing the diversity, the backgrounds of the individuals that you see here today, that you see as speakers. At the DrupalCon Nashville, we had 4 female speakers that were alumni of our class. And, we're just really proud to be a part of that. When I saw who the keynote speakers were today for the event, I was excited that I had the opportunity to introduce Deborah. She's had a massive impact on open source in government and elsewhere, bringing it in, normalizing it. She's been a trailblazer, not just a consumer of open source. She's helped pave the path for large organizations and government to make use of it and help grow the open source community, help employ many of us through her actions and through her growth in stature for open source and free software. So I'm proud to introduce Deborah, and thank you all.
Hello. Ooh, big expectations. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Well, I want to say hello and good morning to everyone here. And also, I've been told that we're live streaming, so hello to the audience online. This morning, I'm going to talk a bit about why I think open source is really important to government. I'm going to do that through the filter of some of my own stories, and that includes why conferences like this are really important. And I'm going to grab the clicker. So I'll start quickly by explaining what my day job is today, and then I'm going to move back in time a bit. So I'm Senior Director of Open Source and Standards at Red Hat. Red Hat is an enterprise software company that uses open source development as its model. My job is to make sure that the communities that Red Hat's commercialized products rely on are healthy and thriving. So I have the best job in the entire company. Although there are millions of open source projects that go into the stack that becomes Red Hat's portfolio, we actually contribute to about 400 to 450 projects actively. Our engineers are part of that community. That's part of our ethos and a great part of my job. So I'm going to step back a little bit and tell you why government's been so important to me. Before I worked for Red Hat, I had about a 10, 11-year career in public service, working for the state of Oregon and then working for Oregon State University in the open source lab. In my time in state government, I had sort of a baptism by fire. I came from private sector, high-speed computing, parallel processing, supercomputing, and had a pretty normal career. I had a fairly brutal experience in the late 1990s when the telecom industry imploded in flames and really hurt a lot of people, employees, stockholders, and I left the private sector for some time. Some of the projects that I'm actively involved in still am working on. The open source initiative, I was on the board for 6 years. That's the international standards organization that sets the standard for open source licenses. I'm now a board member emeritus. I had a 6-year term there. I'm still on the board for Democracy Lab, which focuses on platforms for civic engagement. The open source OSET, Open Source Elections Technology Foundation, and Trust the Vote. incredibly important. I joined that effort about 10 years ago as a board advisor after some midterm elections and some concern about voting systems being closed and proprietary, and their mission has probably never been more important. And so those are some of the projects. And then I founded the Government Open Source Conference, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So the big story and the exciting story for me, in 2004, a bill was introduced in Oregon to mandate that all state agencies first prove that they couldn't use open source software before they did a public procurement. Well, in 2004, there wasn't an awful lot of open source software around, and actually people didn't understand very much about it. I was the deputy state CIO at the time, and part of my responsibility was to represent large technology projects on behalf of many agencies to the legislature. So they gave me a call and asked me if I could explain the bill, and ironically, I knew what open source was. I thought it was important, but it was a horribly written bill. It violated state procurement policies. It said that the state of Oregon should actually define what open source software was. There's all kinds of reasons why it didn't really work. So ironically, I had to actually testify against the bill, but it led to a great public discussion, and there was global coverage of the bill because similar conversations were happening around the world, not just in the U.S., but in other countries, and I'll touch on that a bit as I walk through some of my stories. The end state of that is the bill eventually passed the House. It got killed in the Senate. I had great conversations that in today's world, IEEE would probably be embarrassed that they lobbied against it. And Microsoft has become a friend of open source. But in the day, there were folks that working group that weren't super supportive rather. But one of the things I reflected on after I'd gone through that process was I had to do two things. One is I needed to do public testimony, needed to be able to let the legislature know that in fact we were already doing open source at the state of Oregon. We had every agency of any size was using open source. In fact, the Department of Transportation in 2004 was running Linux on their mainframe and field testing their DMV service desks to be able to do it too. So it wasn't new. It just hadn't been discussed much. There was no prohibition. But I also spent a lot of time with Oregon State University's brand new open source lab because although I fully understood what open source was, and because I came out of the internet industry and understood that it was sturdy and reliable and I didn't buy into any of the fear and apprehension about it, I actually never understood how it was made, what the actual model was. And the more time I spent about it, the more I realized that the model itself was actually of greater value to government than just the application itself. That the possibility to find a way for government agencies to collaborate together on software unique to government and not necessarily relevant to the public sector could present an opportunity to reduce costs and add a lot more value. So I founded the Government Open Source Conference. I spent 5 years as Deputy CIO at the state of Oregon. I went to work for the university at the Open Source Lab, and we created a government conference to kind of give back what the university knew about open source because they're a public agency too. We thought it would be just a small event, maybe 50 people. We ended up having people from, I think, 18 states and 5 countries. So we found out there was actually a void of information around open source and government. This is a nonprofit conference, much like this event. It was organized by state employees. The program didn't have any marketing talking heads. We had some sponsors, but they knew that they were not there for a sales opportunity. That we were really focusing on government employees, helping them understand open source, and also telling their stories and facilitating collaboration amongst them. We finally ended up in DC in 2009 and 2011. David O'Reilly from Health and Human Services received a reward. We started elevating a lot of the open source projects that we were doing and creating more awareness around them. About this time, we started to see more discussions in DC. So in 2008, there was a change of administration, and things started popping up that were not typically common in the DC culture, like meetups and camps. So I went to Transparency Camp at the university here in town. A colleague of mine, Chris Messina, who invented the hashtag and was an old meetup guy, and I stood in the hallway, and he said, I'm not really sure if I'm actually at an unconference because there's no one sitting on the floor in the hallways, because it was just sort of a new culture and a different event. But it was a great time where we had an increase in conversations about the model and about how people could participate, not just in government operations and IT, but in other areas like crisis management, transparency, open data. Open Source for America we created to help give some cover to have public discussions around the usefulness of open source and also dispel some of the myths about it. Free the Code was an initiative I created, which is what now shows up as a matter of coincidence as what the charter is for the new executive order around open source, which is to collaborate and to take code, make code open source rather than having proprietary investments in custom code be locked down. So I'm happy about that. That was a pet peeve of mine. I want to talk about a couple of projects that, to me, exemplify the benefit and high value of open source in the public sector. The International Crisis Congress was held at the World Bank. Crisis Camp was another idea that came out of Transparency Camp, and the idea was to get people together on crisis responses. The woman that founded it was Heather Blanchard, who worked in the Department of Homeland Security's Public Sector Office. She was very discouraged at the federal response to Katrina and wanted to be able to do something more beyond just the government response. And so she used the collaborative model to find people that were both developers that could do a technical response and then people that do translation. So the first, before this even really got fully formed, the Haitian earthquake happened, and we saw a whole host of open source projects show up: Sahana, Shahidi, crowdsourcing applications, OpenStreetMaps, people on the ground there, because the infrastructure wasn't really mapped in Haiti. It had very limited response. That effort actually did things like going through cell phone records and finding people that were buried in the rubble still. It was an amazing project. We know saved lives and accelerated the rebuilding process. And so in that vein, there are a number of really important projects that came out of it in what you would consider the NGO space and quasi-public entities. The Street Map project, there's human rights projects like USAHIDI, which was developed to watch polls during elections to make sure people weren't injured or discouraged. And healthcare IT has also been very important in terms of patient information and being able to relay that at the point of care. Another thing that's been really gratifying to me is the work that open source developers do in the field that is it's not always directly open source projects. In this particular case, in Brazil, there's an annual conference called the FISLE. It's a free software, I always forget the acronym. Anyway, it's a free software conference that happens in Porto Alegre. There's usually 8,000 to 10,000 people there. It's the single largest IT conference in Brazil, and it's around free and open source software. They created something called the Hacker Bus, and they have this huge bus they take around the country, and they have software developers that work with high school kids to help them understand why it's unethical to hack computers and teach them computer ethics, which I thought was a great project. That's all from the open source community. Some of the more far-reaching and visionary projects that I'm really proud to have either supported or just cheerleaded for. Sahani Wirana was the first CTO from the country of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has the highest number of free and open source developers in the world. I don't know why, but they do. It's in the water there. They also initiated the Sahana project, which was a response to the lack of communications and coordination after the tsunami in Indonesia. So this particular project, the Country Portal Project, was a $30 million loan from the World Bank and became a country initiative to create a portal that not only elevated and advocated for the economy of the country and made government services available, but the strategy involved having university students become trained and contributed. So it lifted all boats in the country. It was a wonderful open source project. My friend Tan King started a government modernization process in Malaysia. They opened a competency center for open source and started training It's a giant version of the Code Academy. They started training public service employee, not just to develop software, but also how to use LibreOffice or OpenOffice, how to use non-proprietary tools. So it greatly reduced the cost, and they used that money to modernize their government. The last hero of mine is Samia Mellon, who runs the ICT Global Operations Group for the World Bank. And their charter was to simply go in and build that infrastructure for things like video conferencing, or to provide internet access for meetings for people that were doing the World Bank work in the field. But they found that when they went to Ghana, for instance, that they were so impressed with the work they were doing and the progress and advancement they made through using open source software, that they found themselves becoming ad hoc consultants in these developing nations and helped them with their IT strategy. So they developed an entire host of services filling a gap in developing nations. All three of these women I met because I had been producing the Government Open Source Conference, and they came to it and they met each other, and we started building an international collaboration. So a really wonderful time. So these are my key points for you. If you work on open source, you'll see there's many examples of work you can do outside of government and can touch on government that can affect your communities. So my requests are for you to consider volunteering. I think some of you do that today. This particular event is very important. I think it's one of the last conferences standing. I was talking with Heather. When I used to come to DC and only in a suit, I'm very happy I don't have to wear a suit today. I spoke at the State Department. There used to be Tech at State series. There are a lot of other technical conferences for government employees. And I understand that this is really one of the very last ones. These are important discussions, and they're important events because they're not driven by vendors. We're always grateful as vendors to be able to be in the room and participate and help. But it's really important to have these kind of discussions that are centered around your needs and what you need in IT. I want you to consider being an ally, and by that I'm referring chiefly to diversity and inclusion for people, for underserved communities, for underrepresented communities, to think about what they need for help and to speak up for them. And I'm a big fan of open source as a wonderful entree into, especially to tech careers. Not everyone has the luxury of getting a degree in computer science, but especially for women who may be re-entering the job market or had their career interrupted, there's such an opportunity for them to engage in open source, to be able to build their own resume and portfolio and standing through the work they're doing as volunteers, that it provides access that they might not otherwise have. So please be mindful of that and encourage, especially young women, tell them they can do IT. I want you to be available. What I mean by that is sometimes it just means being willing and letting people know that you can take a phone call or you'll answer the email and share something you know that they don't. Doesn't mean you have to be on a desk volunteering, but just people knowing that there's someone they can ask is really helpful. And sometimes they don't like asking questions in public, so being available to help people is really important. And then just find something that you care about and support that. I think that volunteerism works best when you're working on something that's close to your heart. And I think I did a talk recently on board membership and being on nonprofit boards, and how important it is for you to pick something that's meaningful to you personally. Sometimes people look at nonprofit boards as a way to advance their own career or elevate their standing. But if you're not working on something that's really important to you, then it just doesn't work the same. So that's sort of my nutshell view. And I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions. And I also knew that I'm standing between you and lunch for the folks that are in the room. So that's sort of my nickel tour. Can I ask any questions, answer any questions, or have any comments for anyone in the audience you'd like to share? There's a live mic for anyone that would like to do that. Okay, well, I'll mention that I had a meeting. I got to meet with 18F yesterday. One of the projects that I worked on as an OSI board member, I had the opportunity to meet with folks in the White House when the executive order was being developed. And so I had a chance to check in and see how that was all going and to find out what the gaps were. there were a couple of things I hadn't totally understood, like what the 20% of code being put into a repository meant and such. So we had a great conversation. There are a couple of gaps they talked about, and so I thought I'd make you aware of them too. They're aware that they need help in this area. As a nonprofit board member and a Red Hat employee, I'm going to come back and see if we can help. One area they're concerned is how to build community. They know that's really important. That's an important piece of open source, and so they're looking for people that can help guide that. The other thing, which is really actually very common for open source projects, is documentation. They struggle with documentation. That's always the least exciting thing to do. We have the same problem in our own open source communities. We actually have someone on my staff whose full-time job it is to mentor communities, to help them find the right tools, the right platforms, to recruit volunteers. So it's such a critical thing, and really makes the difference between a community that can work well, the project can work well, but may not be particularly open because it's not accessible and it's not inviting if someone can't find the documentation they need there to engage. So that's something else 18F is looking for help with, if you have any ideas or want to send them some suggestions in their suggestion box. Yeah. All right. Well, any questions? Well, thanks very much. Appreciate you coming.